Hello, Jeando.
Hello, Kevin.
So, last video, you gave us a general introduction to the orders. And in this video, let's go into more detail about what you mean by the orders and your understanding of the orders based on the actual writings of F.M. Alexander and your own
Yes,
work.
yes. We will see that the orders are really central to the way I teach nowadays. Of course, I do not teach with hands, and it has been reproached to me. I think that people have seen the videos where we were talking about these orders, and the teachers of the modern Alexander technique said that that this was just a form of going back to something that was lost, that is finished, that has been well, abandoned by Alexander himself. And so this idea of having orders of inhibition and at the same time order of definite performance has been replaced by this new physiological communication with the hands. And at the end of his life, Alexander so and so. So I thought that to begin and continue to talk about the same subject, it was interesting to go and look at the last book of Alexander, and to realize that in fact digging into the roots was something, well, just maybe interesting as such, but at the same time these concepts, these principles are in fact still present in the very, very late writings of Alexander. So that's, I'm going to start with something that is pointing to that fact, and pointing to the possibilities that maybe Alexander realized that guiding people somatically was not really teaching them. So that's what he says in the last book, in the Universal Constant in Living. In this whole procedure, we see the new principle at work. For if we project these messages, which hold in check the familiar habitual reaction, and at the same time project the new messages which will give free rein to the motor impulses associated with nervous and muscular energy along unfamiliar lines of communication, we shall be doing what Dewey calls thinking in activity. As far as we can judge, mankind has not had the experience of thinking in activity, where the projection of messages necessary to the employment of the primary control of his use is concerned. In the ordinary way, man has just reacted instinctively to any stimulus to activity, whereas the new plan, which I am suggesting, messages, preventive and otherwise, must be consciously projected in their right sequence through the activity. So Alexander is talking about messages, and you have to understand that it's the same thing as orders or instructions, verbal instruction, or intentions of movements. It's a message you send, and we use the term message, I think quite rightly, because when you send a message, you don't expect as soon as you post the message, or as you click return on your keyboard, that the person is going to act on it. You have to, there is a delay between the message that is commanding an action and the action you want to see performed. So this means that at the same time, you can send a message of inhibition and a message of performance. And in all Alexander's books, there is this duality that is present, negated by many, that the orders of inhibition and the orders of definite performance are part of the same groups of intention you are intended to perform later when you enter in activity. This concept that the means whereby are a form of sequence act in the habitual way, and you rehearse your orders, your what Alexander called preventive orders, neck free, head forward and back to lengthen and when, and then you give consent to the activity, is not part of the new principle. It's absolutely obvious to me, yes. So it is interesting to reconsider what is for us, Alexander teacher, well, an axiom of our practice, and to see how this could, well, change the way we give our lessons and open certainly new avenues. So coming back to 1908, in the another text where Alexander is talking about the reeducation of the kinesthetic system, we have again the original thinking, and Alexander is really pointing to the fact that the teacher must see the reaction of the pupil to any orders he's giving. And if you remember the first interview about the orders, Alexander was saying that when he's giving orders of definite performance, orders that should improve the coordination of the person, then the person is doing her best, but she's adding some unwanted subconscious movement. By subconscious, we mean that the person does not realize that she's doing these movements at the same time as the correct movement as ordered to promote a new coordination. So let's hear what he's got to say. It is therefore as necessary to order the inhibition of incorrect and unconsciously performed acts as to give orders which will secure the coordinated use of the mechanisms involved. Therefore, when the teacher has discovered the errors unconsciously committed by the pupil when beginning to rehearse the correct orders, he will draw attention to them and give a definite order concerning what is not to be done, the peculiar bad habit, perhaps, of a lifetime. This negative order must precede all positive commands. In other words, the orders or orders concerning what is not to be done are to be considered primary, and those concerning what is to be done as secondary. It is very easy in reading these lines to bypass some information and to think that if you say that something is primary and something is secondary, well, then they are separated. Then you can think of giving your orders of inhibition and then giving your orders of performance. Orders of performance, I must say, that have disappeared in the new way. In the modern Alexander technique, there are no orders that you should use to command yourself. The orders are mostly orders of definite inhibition, like a neck free, let the neck be free. You should never try and let the neck be free. You should not send your head forward and up. These are just intentions that you have, but that you don't want to see realized. You just want to know what are the movements you're doing when you're projecting these orders, and you want to inhibit those. But what we can miss here is, as Alexander is saying, it's as necessary to order the inhibition of incorrect movements, of incorrect, unconsciously performed acts, It's very important. You will see that you have this idea of inhibition of acts, of performed acts. We are not inhibiting tension. We are not inhibiting a certain activity in the muscles. We are pointing to the pupil acts. When the teacher is watching his pupil, he's got no idea of what are the muscular reaction, because he's not having his hands on the person at that moment. He's just looking. Alexander is very clear about the necessity to look, because with his hands, of course, he may be somewhere on the pupil, but how to, in fact, have an idea that is precise enough for the pupil to have a definite order, an order that is definite of a particular movement that is unconsciously produced. Well, some teachers will have you believe that with their hands they can perceive the whole motor activity of a person, but well, with a video system, it's very simple to, in fact, observe lessons where teachers are working and to notice that very often, even I've got, well, videos of the most revered teachers as Patrick MacDonald, Walter Carrington, and it's absolutely evident that when they are working with their pupil, they don't notice some details of movement that are absolutely incorrect that the pupil is performing. So we have this idea that we want to secure the coordinated use of the mechanism involved. And I realized when discussing with a few viewers, a few persons that have seen these videos, that this is awfully theoretical. They have no idea what is the meaning, the exact meaning of what we are talking about here. So it's necessary to, in fact, use now a representation of what is happening during a conscious guidance and control lesson, to relate what we are discussing at the moment with the activity that is going on in a session. So I am watching, this is a modern Alexander teacher that is sitting, and you will see that she has already learned to organize the different movements of the parts of the torso, because on this picture is absolutely clear that she's quite centered on the chair she's sitting on, but she's holding her left arm with her right hand, and that is because she's performing a procedure. So I want to explain what we call mechanisms and what it is to order movements and to understand a mechanism. So what is presented here is that there is a chain of parts that are linked together. We see here the chain that is made of course, the center of the frontal part of the torso, which is the sternum. There is the sternum. The sternum is connected by the clavicle with a moving part that is called the scapula or shoulder blade. And the shoulder blade is connected, articulated with the upper arm bone, which is in fact connected also with the lower arm bones. So we have here a chain of segments, and that person is in fact trying to understand the mechanism. It's absolutely necessary for the person to have an overall view of what we are asking her to achieve. What has appeared during the previous lesson is that, of course, the pupil is able, for example, in sitting, to organize the movements of the different parts of the torso using orders of definite performance. But each time she's requested to move an arm, use one hand, or in any way, for example, orders such as let the arm fall on the side. It's very, very simple. Well, then the video recording is showing that these movements of the arm are in fact associated without her knowing with some other movements that we call incorrect because they disturb the correct organization of the spring mechanism of the torso, of the mechanism that makes the torso dynamic and so that she can stay there for hours without any problem. So it's necessary for her to start a work that disassociates the reaction of the mechanism of the torso to the voluntary movement of the hands and arm. So for that, we ask her to work intellectually first with a mechanism. And we are going to place the mechanism in very specific controlled conditions. Here, we ask the person to maintain the center of the torso in place. We say to the person, use your orders to lengthen the torso, because we know that when the torso is lengthening, the center part of the upper torso is going to be maintained in place with the spring mechanism. So we have something to look for. We want to see if we introduce a movement, a definite order of performance. Well, for example, pushing the elbow. At the moment, you will see that our right hand is going to act sideways, pushing the upper arm in order to push the elbow outward. We want the person to start to, in fact, realize what is happening when she's doing so. And so we are asking the person to create what is called a closed-ended chain, which means that one side, one extremity, which is here the sternum, is maintained in space or should be maintained in space. If it's not, we can spot it on the video. And the other one is that the left hand is placed on the thigh in a very peculiar way. The fingers, governed by the index finger, are pointing forward, and she's requested to point outward with the thumb. And we expect that orientation of the hand to stay in place during the whole experiment that she's going to conduct by herself. So she's in a situation, of course, there is a teacher that is talking to her, but the teacher is 10,000 kilometers away from her. She's in her room and she's just playing with different movements. There are movements that she already knows how to produce, that are the movements that are organizing the torso, and she's going to be requested to pull the elbow outward, away, of course, from the center of the torso, but also away from the palm that is resting on the thigh. And so this mechanism is like predictable. We know, we can reason, and the person is asked to reason about what should happen. Well, when you look at the system we call mechanism in action, you will find that the logical outcome is that when the upper part of the arm is going to be pushed outward by the right hand, the tip of the elbow should move also outward. If nothing prevents the movement of the hand, well, the incurvation of the wrist, the fact that at the moment her wrist is curved because the little finger, the tip of the elbow, well, if nothing prevents it, because the close-ended chain of acts is going to act on every part of the system, normally what will happen is that her wrist is going to turn. Her wrist is going, and because there will be a change of dimension of the center of the system. That change of dimension has to be repercuted somewhere, and the first candidate is the wrist. So the person has already the experiment prepared. She's told that normally the wrist should turn. If she does not continue an order of a definite movement, that we want the wrist to stay incurved as it is on the picture. So why tell the person that one movement is going to happen? Well, we just tell her because that movement is unwanted, because it will reduce the lengthening we want to see happen. So what is the lengthening we are interested with? Well, in fact, if the wrist was not to move, if she was able to maintain the direction of the movement of the part, of the lower part of the lower arm, then what would happen is that necessarily the shoulder is going to move outward. The upper part of the arm is going to move away from the center in this picture, or we will get an instruction that most of the Alexander teacher must have heard, is upper part of the arm away from one another. How do you get your upper part of the arms away from one another? It's a very interesting question. What is, in other words, the means whereby to obtain that particular act? Because it's quite easy to widen the back of the upper torso, but how to widen the front of the upper torso is a very interesting question. And we see very often an unwanted movement is that when the person wants to widen the upper torso at the back, we see a narrowing at the front. And this is not acceptable. We want to expand the torso in all directions. So here, you must realize that if the wrist and hand are keeping their orientation, then when you pull the tip of the elbow outward here by pushing the upper part of the arm outward, then what will happen is the change of orientation of the upper part of the close end chain. What will happen is that, of course, the scapula will have to move, and the clavicle bone will have to go, of course, downward. Yes? When this movement will happen, I ask the person to realize that what is going to happen with all the tissues of the shoulders. Well, are they going to shrink, or are they going to be expanded? Well, if you look at the drawing of the diagram, you will conclude that, yes, it's going to be expanded. But the next question is, what are you going to feel then if there is a widening of the shoulder that is in fact the consequence of a movement of the upper part of the arm away from the torso? And if the torso stays in place, which is to be seen, then there should be also a movement of the torso away from the arm. What is it? What do you think you are going to feel? Are you going to feel release or tension? And the person, well, has to realize that, yes, there will be a new tension, meaning not an activity of the muscle contracting, but an activity of all the tissue stretching apart. When we say widening, very often we get an idea of release. Here, to see a definite act of widening on the frontal part of the torso, I can assure you that this teacher is going to feel a lot of stretch in the sense of a pool. Alexander used very often the expression antagonistic pulls. Well, yes, but when you are receiving by your own movement some of these antagonistic action, I can tell you that the feeling is going to be a feeling of tension. And we are very poor, our system of sensory system is very poor to, in fact, discriminate between what is a feeling of tension that involves a muscular contraction and what is a feeling of tension that happens because the parts are going apart from one another. The feeling is really, well, it's more or less the same. So how do you know? When you know because you understand how the mechanism is supposed to work, and it makes sense. You don't know because you have a somatic experience of the difference between the two. Not at all. It feels more or less the same. But because you know you're in a control experiment that has been explained to you, you can reason about the movements and you can see yourself perform because the person is asked to perform. It's an experiment. She's testing something. Well, first of all, what she's going to test is what are the unwanted movements that are following her attempt at pulling the elbow slightly to the side. Well, the modern Alexander teachers listening to this will have understood that this is the basis, the model of a very well-known procedure, which is called hands on the back of a chair. The close-ended chain is, in fact, habitually made with the torso of the pupil that is lengthening and widening, and a chair or a wooden bar, which are going to set the hands in the correct conditions and create the experiment where we want to see if the hands are going to stay in the same geometry or not. And Alexander is adamant. He says, well, you should look at your hands. You should look at your hands to see if when you pull the elbow outwards, they are, in fact, turning in the wrong direction or not. So I'm just asking the person to practice the same concept, but with a video system, because the video system is going to help us much more, because the person is going to see afterwards, well, how she managed to disassociate the movement. And that involves making choices, really decide something, making choices. And these choices are opposite to the inclination of the feeling sense. The person, well, will feel that she must do something. And we are going to see what it is she wants to do. And she wants to do because her feeling are dictating these movements. And when the person is in fact suddenly realizes that when she's asked to push the arm outward to mimic the idea of someone pulling her elbows outward, well, I'm requesting the person to push the arm with the hand because this is a touch teacher. And it's like I was presenting to her the idea that if somebody was pulling her elbow slightly outward, away from the wrist and away from the throat and the center of the torso, how would she react? Because there is this idea that the Alexander technique is the use of the hands. That's the modern Alexander technique, no question. But the modern Alexander teacher, they insist that this is the only Alexander technique. That what I'm proposing here is a positioning technique that has nothing to do with the Alexander technique. Well, it has to do with the books, of course, because it's all based on the book. But still, it's quite interesting to listen to the contradiction and to see where we can find a comfortable solution to this. Is this the Alexander technique or not? And so mainly what people say is that this is old ideas, old stuff. that has been completely well overcome or improved by the new way of physiological teaching, meaning that you make the person feel with your hands what is the correct organization. This idea of combining orders of definite performance and orders of definition, definite inhibition has disappeared because there is no orders of definite performance. The right thing should happen by itself. And it is interesting that when some teachers of the modern Alexander technique wants to contradict me, they say that in fact, before using hands, Alexander was a breathing teacher. He was teaching the full thoracic breathing, which has nothing to do with the Alexander technique. It is quite strange because they consider that the breathing system is like independent of the mechanism of the torso movements. It's very strange, and the whole idea that the Alexander technique teaching is about the hands, in fact, misses the point, I think. It's because, in fact, the time the teacher is going to spend with the pupil is relatively short. You have to really impress the pupil or the sensory system of the pupil during the 60 minutes or the 45 minutes of your lesson, to imagine that at the end of the week, this is going to still influence his behavior, and that his habits will have disappeared for that. Because in the end, Alexander started to teach himself, and there was no touch teacher around. There was nobody with hands giving him lessons, and he refused all his life to have touch lessons. So the same thing is happening to our pupil or to myself, is that in the end, when the teacher is gone, what have you got left? Do you think that the sensory impression that you got during the lesson is going to help you? No, you will need to use orders. You will need to, in fact, command your own activity. And you'll have to disassociate these commands from your habitual feelings. Because otherwise, you're just going to reproduce what you're doing normally that you want to change. Makes no sense. So in the end, teaching with hands or teaching with instructions come back to the same problem, is that the pupil at one time has to organize her own movement by herself, which means she has to give instructions to herself of movements, of definite performance, if you want, and she has to, in fact, learn to combine these orders with orders of definite inhibition. So in that case, in the case of this lady, we saw that she involved her shoulders in everything she does. For example, when she's asked to perform a simple movement with the hand, go and touch the opposite arm, is not very complex. You will notice that this raising the hand is raising the shoulders. And the muscle of the shoulders are the muscle of the neck. So when you see that the movement of the hand make the shoulder go up, yes, there is a problem because she's tensing her neck as a result of her own movement. This is an incorrect movement. It's very simple. So we want the person to notice this and to think, okay, I want to promote correct movement, but at the same time, I want to give instructions to myself of refusing to do movements that most of the time I don't feel I do. Because this person is a somatic teacher. She should feel that she's doing some sort of unwanted movement. The fact is, she does not. The fact is, she does never. These movements are below our sensory awareness. And it's no point telling her, you should feel your shoulder when you move the hand. it's not working because she cannot think of so many things at once. It's as simple as that. So the solution is, in fact, to teach her to think at many more things at once. And when you are asked to perform a movement with the thumb, with the fingers, a movement that is easily controllable, are you losing the 90-degree angle between the thumb and the index will be seen very obviously on the video. It will be seen whether the wrist is staying in place. So it's not for the teacher, this, it's for the pupil. The pupil is going to observe how she reacts to the idea to pulling the elbow outward or pushing the arm to have the elbow pulled outward. And if she sees herself moving the thumb and the fingers and the wrist and the torso and the opposite shoulder, well, she may think that next time she plays the experiment, well, she may want to change what is happening. She will be the agency of change. Well, our decision will be. Not someone else, not the teacher. No, no, no. The teacher is just there to present the problem and the elements and name the spots, name the movements. That's all. So that the person can have a conception that is not based on what she feels, but a conception that is based on an understanding of the mechanism. Because without an understanding of the mechanism, having people place their hands on the back of a chair makes very little sense in the end. And you will not have people work at home with procedures that they can't make sense of. It's very, very clear. I have seen very few pupils working in their homes with their hands on the back of a chair procedure because it doesn't make sense to them. They don't understand why it's done. Yes, and so we have to make things simple. It's very simple. You have a number of movements you want to see perform. You have a number of movements you don't want to see perform. You can prepare yourself for the experiment. You preparing means a discussion with your own mind, thinking, okay, this is what I want to do. This is what I don't want to see. And now let's experiment to see how many of these mental orders I can keep in mind and transform into definite actions, into something that is going to be seen on screen, no matter what I feel. The somatic result is for the moment irrelevant. I am prepared to feel as wrong as I can, just to see if I can maintain the orders. To maintain means that you will see in practice that the upper part of the arm will move apart from each other while the hands are not moving, as if it was obvious. It will be obvious to the viewer. That's the problem with this technique, is that when you see somebody that has practiced these inquiries in action, how to use the mind in activity, and they show you how they pull the tips of the elbows away from the thumb and away from the upper part of the torso, well, there is very little to see, in fact. The hands are not moving, the shoulders are not going up, the torso is like lengthening if you want, and easy. This technique is simple, very simple when it's performed, when you know how to, in fact, command a large number of movements and command at the same time the inhibition of unwanted contortions. Well, Alexander used words sometimes that are a bit offensive, and it doesn't help. I know because I have sometimes the same habit, because maybe because I read Alexander too much. So Alexander is saying, that is asking the person to perform the procedure. Let's say the procedure is similar to the one I have presented. There is a person that is holding a bar so that the hand and wrist, the hand and forearm are kept in the same geometry, and the person is requested to keep the geometry in view so that the person is able to inhibit any movement that would in fact disturb the geometry between the hand and the forearm. That's Alexander is very clear about this. So when the person is going to pull the elbows outward or push the arm as we've seen, then the teacher is on the lookout for unwanted movement. And that's what he says. So I've gone back to man supreme tense. I've gone back to 19010. The subconscious jerkings and contortions pointed out one by one are patiently inhibited by the pupil, sometimes directly, but more often by the explicit use under my direction of guiding orders which gradually coordinate and remedy the whole faulty system of the pupil muscular action. That is in itself, that is something we need to observe, we need to stop and listen to and understand. So, okay, let's forget about the jerkings and the contortions. We see movements. We see that the person is doing movements, and these movements are unwanted. They disturb the correct organization of the mechanism of the torso, so we don't want them. And so Alexander is saying that they are patiently inhibited by the pupil. What does that mean? Well, it means that at first, when the pupil is going to perform the sequence, the person is not going to succeed in inhibiting the movements. The movements are parts of her way of being. And she doesn't even realize that she's starting to do the wrong movement until she sees the video once again. There is like orders, subconscious orders, that the person does not know she's giving herself. It's like there is someone inside that person. It's spooky. No. In fact, it's very much more simple. Is that the person has some sensory rules. She may not accept to have the muscle of the shoulder stretched. She does not know that, but it's a fact. As soon as something starts to stretch, oh dear, she will do anything else to stop it. The person has, so it's difficult to hear. It's like contortions of the jerkings, but it's like fear. The fear of a feeling that would be tense, that would be, pulling on a spring is
And
a stretch.
for people who haven't actually done this, it's one of the most fascinating things is when you do a new movement, it can be the smallest of new movements, but it can feel disproportionately wrong. It can feel completely wrong. It's not really directly related to the size of the new movement. So it could be tiny on camera, but huge in your internal awareness of it, that then prevents you from doing something new because it just feels so wrong, it can't be right. And then you watch the video and you see it may have been right.
Yeah. This is an effect of what we discussed last time. I exposed the idea, the scientific findings that we are subject to reaction, orienting reaction. And so we stop with the intellectual construction straight away, and something is focusing all our attention. That is wrong. That is not possible. And imagine a somatic teacher that has been trained for years to not do, the correct movement should happen by themselves. That is the theory. And so in that case, well, she's asked very simple movements. That's a definite performance. We want to pull the arm outward. Yes. Oh dear, but that is wrong. I've had teacher had one lesson with me and never come back. because the feeling associated with the injunction, the dogmatic injunction, you should not do, the two together, well, the person cannot reason anymore. Impossible. It says, "Oh dear, but he's crazy. He wants me to widen the upper torso." Yes, and so yes, there is no proportion because it's not reason. It's a resistance, and so patiently inhibit means, well, going back to it. You think, wow, I've done it again without realizing. So then Alexander adds something that is very important. That's why you will see I've put it in red so that we don't forget to talk about. Instead of asking the person to inhibit directly, because out of desperation, the teacher, after having inflicted to the pupil the same procedure 2, 3, 4 times, and the person is starting to really get white and decomposed, like because she's faced with something that is like defeating her intellectual, physical, so emotionally, it's not easy to patiently inhibit unwanted movements. So then out of desperation, the teacher has to offer a means whereby this inhibition can arrive, can be at least seen by the person. It's very important that the person somehow suddenly discover that, oh yes, in fact, I can stop these movements. So my view as a teacher is I must find something to help the person to, in fact, inhibit, be successful in projecting a movement, an order of definite inhibition of an unwanted movement and succeed on screen. And the person sees, oh yes, I'm not moving the shoulder anymore. Yes, fantastic. So this cannot be achieved most of the time by direct order of inhibition. It will not work. So Alexander gives the clue. More often, this inhibition will happen by the explicit use under my direction of guiding orders which gradually coordinate and remedy the faulty system of the pupil's actions. If you stop a second to these words, you will find something very surprising, because Alexander is talking of an explicit use of guiding orders which coordinate the faulty system of actions. Explicit means clearly detailed in words. Explicit doesn't mean that the pupil will somatically understand. No, they are explicit orders. And so very often I have to take a representation, a schematic representation, as I've shown you before. That schematic representation was used during a session because the pupil could not patiently inhibit the unwanted movements. And so with the use of a diagram, exactly showing how the whole system was related, the person suddenly was able to coordinate, not of course the unwanted movements, but to coordinate the movement of the torso differently relatively to the new movements, so that the shoulder was not raised and there was the jerkings and contortion disappeared.
So the
And
use
so,
the
yeah,
use of a diagram helps people move from the realm of sensations and feelings into the realm of reason.
reasoning, yes, tremendously. Yes, I could not teach. People know that I'm producing diagrams all the time, but why? Well, it's because it helps my students to patiently inhibit the unwanted movements, because they start to have a better understanding of the mechanism we are dealing with. Yes, it's fundamental, these diagrams. It's not for show, for play. No, no, no. It's part of teaching the initial Alexander technique. Teaching the Alexander technique without any diagrammatic support, to make the people reason, Because why is the person not inhibiting the unwanted movement? Well, because as soon as she starts to enter into action, the inhibition disappears. I mean, she's not reasoning anymore. The basic inhibition is the capacity to continue to reason. And the person, as soon as she starts to move, is not reasoning anymore. Yes? So reasoning. Alexander makes a link, so I need to expand on it. If we are to understand the means whereby principle on which the teacher who adheres to the idea of unity in the working of the human organism will base his teaching method, we must recognize that the attainment of any desired end, of the performance of any act, involve the direction and performance of a connected series of preliminary acts by means of the mechanisms of the organism. And that therefore, if the use of the mechanism is to be directed as to result in the satisfactory attainment of the desired end, the direction for this use must be projected in a connected series to correspond with the connected series of preliminary acts. So diagrams are to show the person that the performance of any act, for example, moving the hand, involves the direction and performance of a connected series of preliminary acts by means of the mechanism of the organism. If you don't understand the mechanism, if you have no idea what movements are we talking about, yes, what the movements are segmental movements. There are movements of different, as you've seen, of different bones, and I've not shown the segments of the torso and where they are articulated, because we are talking of the link system that Alexander calls the anatomical structure. And any posture that you want to assume can only be assumed through the concerted movements of the different parts of the anatomical structure. So if there are unwanted movement, it means that the anatomical structure is functioning as a whole. Is that movements are not independent. You have to make them independent if you don't want to see on screen that when you're performing something with the elbow, the whole chain is affected. It's as simple as that. And understanding of the of the initial Alexander technique that I teach is based on two pillars. There is one is that well, Alexander is clearer than I am, so I'm going to use his presentation. And he says, those who are fortunate or unfortunate enough to undertake to act as teacher are well aware of the difficulty of finding an adult who can, as we say, think of more than one thing at a time, or perform satisfactorily any evolution requiring the coordinate use of even two parts of the organism. That's one very important axiom in my way of teaching, is that I'm not aware of any adult we can easily think of more than one thing at a time when involved in an activity. That's something you must add to that sentence, because of course people can think of many things, but once you've set the condition of the experiment in place, you've organized the different parts of the link system in a geometry, and then you ask the person to move one part in a specific, very clearly, explicitly determined direction, well, it's an order of definite performance, suddenly you will find that the person has totally forgotten about the unwanted movement that have been pointed time and time again when she was performing such an action. The person has forgotten. Simply, I always play with my pupils. I explain something very complex, and they suddenly are able to perform the acts and to inhibit the unwanted acts. and we are very satisfied. And I say to the person, that's it. Have a walk. And then I watch how the person is going to move to stand up from the chair. And I say, did you continue to project the movement of the ribs at the back of the armpit away from this and away from that, or not? And the person looks at me with a smile and say, I think I did not. And I say, yes, check on video, you will see. So we, for example, in the setting of the experiment, you can be totally confident and perform the action properly. And then suddenly something happens, you stand up, and it's as it never happened. You're back to the old mode, the old habit, yes? And the old habit is to think of one thing at a time. So
And,
the
this
central,
comes back
yeah,
to the difference between reason and feeling, because if you're going by your feelings and
yeah,
sensations, you can only think of it's just one thing at a time really quickly.
yeah,
Whereas if you use reason and diagrams, you're now in the realm of principles and rules and relationships between the parts and cause and effect, and you're now out of the trance of your sensations, and then trying to guide yourself
yeah.
by just how you feel, what feels right or wrong in the moment.
Yes. So that's we've got that pillar. If you want to reason, you need to have a few objects in mind at the same time. Object of definite inhibition, of the object of definite performance in these experiments. But the second pillar is the understanding of the mechanism, because you cannot start from scratch and decide I'm going to have orders in my head. No, you must understand the mechanism. That's the second pillar. And Alexander is pointing the finger to what he consider is a bad teacher. So I'm going to. He's not saying that these teachers are. That he's not precising which teacher he's talking about. He's just saying it is safe to assume that they have little conscious knowledge of the use of these mechanisms, either in the field of theory or that in practice. And even that little will be on a specific basis. The true relation of cause and effect on a general basis in connection with the working of these mechanisms will not be given due consideration. And as we shall see, the majority of effects, symptoms of some cause or causes that they chance to recognize will not be treated by them as such, but as causes, and dealt with in accordance with the end gaining principle. That is in constructive conscious control of the individual, the second bush. And so the knowledge of the use of the mechanisms. Very often you will find that this can be translated as a somatic knowledge, as if conscious knowledge and somatic knowledge in the mind of Alexander were the same thing, when in his mind, these are absolutely opposite categories. You can have the somatic knowledge, it's the first person experience. You feel how it is when you move an arm. How that relates to how you move the other parts of the system is like a general impression. I feel easy when I do it. That's the somatic knowledge. Conscious knowledge of the use of this mechanism, that's different. That's well, you have to understand which parts the mechanism is made of, where are the axis of rotation of the parts, how the movement of one part is going to necessarily affect parts that are very far away from it. And this is central to the Alexander technique. What is central is not the use of the hands or not the use of the hands. What is central is how do you transmit to a pupil, any pupil, the necessary understanding of the mechanism so that the person can start to use them in a conscious way. That is very often forgotten. And I have a very interesting example. there is very recently there has been a blog by a modern Alexander technique teacher, a somatic teacher that is well known. It's on the web, you know. It's John Nichols, and he's considering breathing and the problem with breathing, and Alexander has dealt with exactly the same problem. Yes, it's very interesting to compare what the somatic teacher is saying and what Alexander is saying. So what John Nichols is saying is that um, that because of the basic anatomy, the ribs should move in the back and sides with every breath. Yeah. But in many adults, that no longer happens because the back muscles, in trying too hard to maintain upright posture, grip the back of the rib cage. And he adds, I've been very pleasantly surprised at how many students can begin to feel a little bit of movement of the ribs spreading at the sides of the lower back if you, the touch teacher, put your well-directed hands there and ask them to think of or imagine each in-breath feeling that area of the torso rather than feeling just the abdomen. It's allowing and encouraging even a tiny bit of movement there that begins to free chronically held back muscle in the rigid posture type. So that's one view. And the same problem is dealt by Alexander. And here is his take. The normal condition of vigor in the action of the component parts of the respiratory mechanism is greatly interfered with. General nervous relaxation is brought about, and a feeble, flabby action becomes permanent. Certain muscles of the thoracic mechanisms, which should take the lead in the performance of the breathing movements, remain entirely inert for the greater part of life, whilst others, which were never intended by nature to monopolize this particular act, but only to serve as a relief or change, are used solely for the act of breathing. Hence arises a condition in which the posture, the symmetry of the body, the graceful normal curve of the whole frame suffer alteration and change. So what is different between the two, between the somatic view and the reason view? Well, what is different is that Alexander is clearly pointing to the component parts of the respiratory mechanisms with an S. So there is a mechanisms of different parts, and is not asking the person to specifically try to find a movement somewhere by imagining something. Well, no, he has a reasoning approach to the fact that the mechanism of breathing and performance of breathing movements are dependent on the movements of the torso, of the mechanism of the torso. If the person has no idea of the movements of the different parts of the torso, and you make her feel that part, well, yes, you may get some results. You may find that while your hands are there, the person is going to expand the ribs. I've been in this situation before. I know that. But what is very interesting is to, in fact, check whether the person has learned. If the person has learned something from that, you will find that in other conditions, the person will be able to use the mechanism in such a way that there is an expansion of the ribs on the sides. But I have, I'm sorry to say that I have many modern Alexander teachers that have been trained, in the best schools. And when they start to understand how the mechanism of the torso is working and what could make the ribs move, they discover that, the back muscles are not trying to hold the person erect. These back muscles are just a consequence, are just a an indirect result of the way the whole torso is guided by the person. And so here we have to realize that if there is an action that is feeble, that is flabby, as Alexander is saying, well, when you start exercising muscle that have been out of action for a long time, you must prepare yourself for difficulty, for having, well, little contact with these muscles, so that the least movement is going to feel as enormous, as enormously strained and difficult. And very often this will be seen on the face of the person. It's as if the person is like to break a massive rock, when in fact we want a very, very tiny movement. Well, this is to be expected. If the parts have been out of action, you must understand that everything that is involved in moving these parts is going to be, well, of course, very difficult to bring into action. So at first, you must understand that these lessons are not going to be nice release. And, you know, a sort of going into contact with your inner self, some ideas like this. No, you're going to be in contact with the very difficulty of making movements come into play. And so reasoning has to do with, in fact, anticipating. And if you anticipate the wrong thing, well, it's very difficult for you to go into the practice and the discipline that is requested. So there are very, very many differences between the somatic approach. We don't ask people to imagine that a movement is going to happen, because the person can imagine imagine what she's already performed, what she's got a feeling for. We ask person to, in fact, explicitly define where is the center of the rotation. Yes, where is the component parts of the mechanism, how the component parts of the mechanism should in fact prepare the movement we are asking for. So very often, if you want the side ribs to start moving, you have to learn to direct the upper torso in relation with the middle torso. It's very far. It seems like it's not related, but it is. That's how the mechanism is working. If you don't understand how the mechanism is working, well, there is very little chance that you will get success. And it's very funny, because what Mr. Nichols is writing is part of a post you will find on the net. It's about difficult students. But the term is difficult non-feeling students. The students that don't feel how the teacher is modifying their structure, so that because they don't feel how they are modified, of course they cannot, apparently, because Mr. Nichols thinks that if they don't feel if they don't feel a gesture, they will not be able to command it. It's how different the somatic system is from the reason system. It's like a difficult non-feeling student. I have difficulties with most of my students, because we are all, in fact, there is not one group that I call the difficult students. We are all difficult students. We are, all of us, we are faced with the fact that one moment we reason, and the next we feel, and then we forget everything that we planned. And so, yes, we have all difficulty patiently inhibiting unwanted movements. We have all difficulty at first realizing that we need to understand how the mechanisms are working, that without this understanding, without this analysis and this reasoning, there is very little chance that you can get out of the somatic morass of the spontaneous wrong movements that you're doing without even feeling you are. because asking somebody to move the ribs with your hands on them to get some release in a specific way somewhere, I don't see how this can help the person to, in fact, create a conscious conception of the mechanism work as a whole. No
and of
way.
course, the only way to get out of feeling and into reason is through the use of the orders, the verbal instructions.
Yes. And the use of the orders is as much to command the movements of the different parts of the mechanism that you want and the one that you don't, as to, in fact, when you watch your video, well, the orders are going to help you. It's the only help you have to start to see what you want to see. Because when you present the movements of a person, even if you tell people beforehand what it is you're going to look at, you ask them, so did you see? And at first the person didn't see anything. Why? Because the person is not trained to, in fact, superimpose on what they see a structure of geometry, a structure of guidelines, and say, well, I have to look at least 4 or 6 different spots moving relatively to 3 or 4 different guidelines. Well, that is like you would say a skill. It's not a complex skill. Anybody can learn to do that. It's easy. But if you don't learn the skill, you don't have it. If you don't have it, you don't see. If you don't see, if you perform an experiment and look at yourself performing in the experiment and just get an emotional response to it, well, I look tense. It seems I'm not having a good time. If you react in this way, the experiment is not going to be meaningful to you. And if it's not meaningful to you, you're not going to, in fact, reproduce that experiment. If you don't reproduce the experiments you've learned with your teacher, but you're not learning anything. You had an experience, yes, you felt something, maybe you've seen yourself expanded and lengthening and balanced and in control, but if that is all, if the session with the teacher is in your idea, what is the Alexander technique learning, you're not going to change. You're going to stay exactly in the same way because your habits are going to be so strong and, in fact, reinforced by such a session. No, it's the Alexander technique only if you start applying it to yourself. Applying the initial Alexander technique is applying a system of inquiry, of controlled experiments, where you monitor how the different parts of the system are, in fact, I would say, reacting, how you react with these different parts when you command yourself to do a simple movement with the arms or the feet or even the head if you want. And then if you learn this system of inquiry, you're not learning a set, fixed system of rules and instructions. No, no, no. Most people, my students, when they start, they ask me, when is it that I will have the correct guiding orders? And the answer is never. It depends on the activity. If you start, I don't know, flying in the air, or you start using a new tool or a new instrument, or you're confronted with a new situation, what you need is not a correct set of orders. What you need is a system of inquiry that will help you notice first what it is you're doing when you're stimulated in this new way. What are the unwanted movements then? You cannot predict that. Yes? And so you need to watch yourself. And then how to create commands. I'm teaching orders to my pupils, of course. I'm telling them, do this, do this, do this, and stop doing this, stop doing this, stop doing this. That's clear. But more than that, I am teaching my students how to use orders, create orders, how orders are created. I explain how I create the new orders, not the old preventive orders, neck free, head forward and up, back to lengthen and widen, which I don't use very much. I use them in a different way. But the new orders. The new orders are the orders of definite performance. And I explain to them that these unconscious gesture, unconscious movement that are unwanted, they are not to be seen when you're lying down. They are not to be seen when you're not in activity. These are reactions. And you need to create the stimulus. You need to create a problem. You need to create a situation where you have to react. And then you watch. For example, each order we give is like a stimulus to do wrong. Because of course the order is correct, but it's correct if you watch your, for example, in what the lady was doing this sort of hands on the back of a chair procedure. If the person is not watching the geometry of the wrist, of the hand relative to the lower torso, and expand the elbows, it's worth nothing.
Okay, that's a brilliant place to stop this week.
Sorry.
This is
I get carried out.
This is a huge topic, obviously, so we'll continue with this next week. So everybody listening and watching, you'll get links to Jeando's videos underneath this video, link to Jeando's websites underneath this video, and we'll see you in the next one. Thank you, Jeando.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye.